November 17th, 1965, 1:15 p.m., the Central Highlands of Vietnam. A column of American soldiers stretches 550 yards through elephant grass taller than a man's head. They are exhausted. Some have not slept in 48 hours. 3 days ago, their sister battalion fought the most intense battle of the war at a place called Landing Zone X-Ray. Yesterday, they relieved those battered survivors and held the same ground against North Vietnamese attacks. This morning, they were told to march just 2 miles to a new landing zone for helicopter extraction, an administrative move, a walk in the sun to get out of the way of B-52 bombers coming from Guam. The men plop down where they stand when the halt comes. Some close their eyes and sleep instantly. Others light cigarettes or open cans of sea rations. No one pulls security. No one watches the jungle. And hiding in that jungle less than 100 meters away are 1,100 North Vietnamese, soldiers who have been tracking this column for the past hour. In exactly 3 minutes, those North Vietnamese are going to open fire. And in the next 2 hours, 155 Americans will die in the deadliest single battalion disaster of the entire Vietnam War. This is the Battle of LZ Albany, the battle Hollywood forgot, the battle that came the day after Ia Drang, and it is a story of catastrophic leadership failures, unimaginable courage, and horror that survivors will never forget. The 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, is part of the legendary 1st Cavalry Division, the same regiment that rode with Custer at Little Bighorn. Now, in 1965, they ride helicopters instead of horses, but the unit traditions run deep. Their marching song is Gary Owen. Their esprit de corps is unmatched, and on this November morning they number 375 men, an understrength battalion because they have already taken casualties in previous operations. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McDade commands. He is a career officer who has seen combat in World War II and Korea. He knows war, but what he does not know is that he is about to make decisions that will be studied in military academies for decades as examples of what never to do. The backstory matters. For 3 days, starting November 14th, 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry under Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore fought desperately at Landing Zone X-Ray at the foot of the Chupong Massif. Moore's men air assaulted into a clearing and immediately ran into 3 North Vietnamese regiments. 450 Americans against over 2,000 North Vietnamese. The battle was hell, close quarters fighting, bayonet charges, human wave assaults, but Moore's men held. They inflicted massive casualties on the enemy. And when reinforcements arrived on day 2, the North Vietnamese pulled back. That battle at X-Ray will become famous. A book will be written. A movie will be made. Mel Gibson will play Hal Moore. We Were Soldiers will tell that story to the world. But what happens the next day at LZ Albany will be largely forgotten, overshadowed, a footnote. And that is a tragedy, because what happens at Albany is in many ways more significant. It shows how quickly victory can turn to disaster, how one bad decision can cascade into catastrophe. November 16th, 2nd Battalion 7th Cavalry marches into LZX Ray to relieve 1st Battalion. The fighting is over. The North Vietnamese have withdrawn. Bodies litter the clearing. The smell of death hangs heavy. 2nd Battalion takes up defensive positions for the night, while 1st Battalion is lifted out by helicopter. The plan for November 17th is simple. B-52s from Guam will carpet bomb the Chupong Massif, but American troops need to be outside a 2-mile safety radius before the bombers arrive, so 2 battalions will march overland to new landing zones. 2nd Battalion 5th Cavalry will go to LZ, Columbus to the northeast. 2nd Battalion 7th Cavalry will go to LZ Albany to the north. Both moves are supposed to be administrative, not tactical, just getting troops clear of the bombing zone and positioned for helicopter extraction. The distance is about 2 miles. Should take a few hours. What could go wrong? Everything. At 9 a.m, 2nd Battalion 5th Cavalry moves out first. 10 minutes later, McDade's battalion follows. But here is the first critical mistake. McDade receives almost no intelligence briefing about the route or the enemy situation. He will later recall having no idea what to expect. He's told to establish an LZ at a place called Albany. That is it. No enemy situation update. No terrain analysis. No contingency plans. His operations order to his company commanders is equally brief. Captain Joel Sugdinis, commanding Alpha Company, tells his men the situation is pretty unclear, but they are the lead element and will be extracted at Albany. The entire planning process takes less than 2 hours. No time for detailed coordination, no time to wargame what-ifs, just verbal orders. Point at a map, march. The column formation is tactically questionable from the start. Alpha Company leads with the reconnaissance platoon at point, then comes Delta Company, Charlie Company, Headquarters Company with the Battalion Command Group, and bringing up the rear is Alpha Company 1st Battalion 5th Cavalry, which is attached for this movement. The battalion stretches out over 500 metres. Companies lose visual contact with each other in the dense vegetation and tall elephant grass. The jungle here is thick. Triple canopy overhead blocks sunlight. The elephant grass at ground level grows 8 to 10 feet tall. Visibility is measured in metres. This is ambush country. Every infantry officer knows you do not march a battalion in column through terrain like this without flank security, without point elements far forward scouting, without constant communication. But McDade's battalion does exactly that. Worse, aerial reconnaissance reported no enemy contact at LZ Albany before the movement began. Chief Warrant Officer Hank Ainsworth flew over Albany in a Huey and saw nothing. Based on that report, Brigade Commander Colonel Brown decides not to fire preparatory artillery on Albany. Why alert the enemy if there is no enemy there? It is a logical decision based on faulty intelligence. The North Vietnamese are masters of camouflage. They are there, watching, waiting. And another mistake compounds the situation. A 2nd Battalion 7th Cavalry marches. They burn grass huts along the route. The smoke rises high into the clear sky. Visible for miles, every North Vietnamese unit in the area can see exactly where the American column is and where it is going. The element of surprise is gone, but the Americans do not know the enemy is even watching, so they continue marching, strung out, tired, focused on just getting to Albany and getting extracted. At approximately 1 p.m, the head of the column nears LZ Albany. The reconnaissance platoon under 1st Lieutenant Pat Payne reaches the edge of the clearing. 2 landing zones, actually. 2 clearings with a large copse of trees and dense vegetation in between. This is Albany. Payne's men spread out and begin checking the area, and that is when they spot the enemy. A North Vietnamese soldier is sleeping behind a 6-foot termite mound. Payne jumps on him, captures him. His platoon sergeant grabs a 2nd sleeping North Vietnamese soldier. A 3rd escapes into the jungle. McDade is notified. Prisoners. This is valuable intelligence. McDade makes a decision. He calls all his company commanders forward to the head of the column to discuss how to deploy the battalion at the landing zone and to question the prisoners. Think about this. The battalion commander calls every company commander and their radio operators forward, away from their companies, concentrating all the leadership in one spot at the head of the column. The rest of the battalion, stretched over 500 metres, halts in place. The men are exhausted. They have been marching in oppressive heat wearing full combat gear. When the word comes to halt, they drop where they stand. Some fall asleep instantly. Others eat, drink water, smoke, rest. Almost no one establishes security. Almost no one is watching the jungle. The companies have no leaders because all the commanders are forward. The battalion is as vulnerable as it is possible to be. And 100 metres away in the jungle to the east, North Vietnamese soldiers from 2 battalions are watching every move. 1:15 p.m, Lieutenant James Lawrence is with Delta Company in the middle of the column. He is lying in the elephant grass, helmet on, resting. His best friend, Lieutenant Don Cornett, is with Charlie Company just ahead of Lawrence's position. The 2 have been roommates since officer basic school, roommates in jump school, roommates on the ship to Vietnam. They became platoon leaders together, got promoted to 1st lieutenant together, both made executive officer the same day. They are brothers in all but blood. In less than 5 minutes, one of them will be dead. The North Vietnamese plan is brutally simple and devastatingly effective. The 8th Battalion, 66th Regiment and 1st Battalion, 33rd Regiment total about 1,100 men, fresh troops, well armed. They have been shadowing the American column. Now they position themselves in an L-shaped ambush along the east and north sides of the American formation. The 6th Company will hit the head of the column straight on. 1st and 2nd Companies will strike the upper and lower flanks. 8th Company will attack from behind, completing the encirclement. Multiple North Vietnamese soldiers have climbed trees and positioned themselves in the canopy overhead. They have excellent fields of fire down into the elephant grass where the Americans are resting. At 1:15 p.m, without warning, every North Vietnamese weapon opens fire simultaneously. The sound is indescribable. hundreds of AK-47s firing on full automatic, heavy machine guns, mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, all at point-blank range. The elephant grass erupts with muzzle flashes and impacts. Americans die in the first seconds. Charlie Company takes the worst of it initially. 20 men killed in the first minute, dead before they can even understand what is happening. The lead element, Alpha Company, loses 2 entire platoons, 50 men, killed or wounded in the first minute. North Vietnamese soldiers are everywhere. Not just in the jungle to the east, they're in among the Americans. They're in the trees overhead shooting down. This is not an ambush from a distance. This is close quarters slaughter. Lieutenant Lawrence hears the firing erupt. He starts to move, to react, and then 2 bullets punch through his helmet. The rounds miss his head by fractions of an inch, but the impact whips his neck back violently. He crashes backward into the grass, paralyzed from the waist down. He cannot move his legs. He thinks his spine is severed. He lies there in the elephant grass, certain he is dying, and waits for death to come. All around him the battle explodes into absolute chaos. Men are screaming. Some are calling for medics. Some are returning fire blindly into the jungle. Some are running. Some are frozen in terror. The North Vietnamese soldiers run down the length of the column, peeling off units to attack isolated groups of Americans. They fire from the trees. They throw grenades into clusters of soldiers. They execute wounded Americans they find in the grass. This is not just an ambush. This is an annihilation. McDade and his command group are at the head of the column when the firing starts. They sprint for the copse of trees in the middle of the landing zone, Alpha Company's reconnaissance. Platoon and 1st Platoon establish a defensive perimeter in the trees. They lay down suppressive fire and create a pocket of relative safety. But they are cut off from the rest of the battalion. Between their position and where the bulk of the battalion was resting is now filled with North Vietnamese soldiers. The radio communications break down almost immediately. Company commanders are with McDade at the trees. Their companies are scattered along the column, taking fire with no leadership. Radio operators are killed, equipment is destroyed. The noise of battle drowns out everything. McDade cannot get a clear picture of what is happening. His operations officer, Captain Jim Spires, will later say the ability to command and control the battalion simply does not exist. Units are fighting as squads and platoons, isolated, surrounded, desperately trying to survive. Charlie Company is being destroyed. Lieutenant Cornett is there somewhere in the maelstrom. His friend Lawrence lies, paralyzed less than 100 yards away. The elephant grass is so tall that soldiers cannot see more than a few feet. North Vietnamese voices echo through the vegetation. Americans hear boots swishing through the grass and do not know if it is friendly or enemy until someone is right on top of them. Hand-to-hand fighting breaks out in dozens of locations. Bayonets, rifle butts, knives. Men grapple in the grass, killing each other at arm's length. This is primal combat. Survival. The North Vietnamese are executing wounded Americans, walking through the grass, shooting anyone who moves. Some Americans play dead, hoping to be overlooked. Others fight to the last round. There is no front line, no rear, just chaos and killing in every direction. The Americans try to call for artillery support. Fire missions are requested. But here is the terrible problem. The North Vietnamese have closed so quickly and are so intermixed with the Americans that firing artillery means killing your own men. The forward air controller tries to bring in airstrikes. Helicopter gunships arrive and begin firing rockets. But again, how do you hit the enemy without hitting friendlies when everyone is in the grass together? Some airstrikes do come in. Napalm. The jellied gasoline explodes across the landing zone. American soldiers are burned, killed by their own air support. Lawrence will later describe being dragged toward the trees and then dropped in the open while napalm is falling. The heat, the fire, the screaming, friendly fire casualties mount. Not because of incompetence, but because the tactical situation makes supporting fires almost impossible. Delta Company tries to move toward the copse of trees where Alpha Company has established the perimeter. Lawrence, though paralyzed, manages to point his men in the right direction. Someone grabs him and drags him through the grass. Every bump sends agony through his injured spine. He expects to die at any moment. The soldier dragging him drops him and runs. Lawrence lies in the clearing watching men sprint past him. Some are Americans fleeing towards safety. Some are North Vietnamese pursuing them. The grass swishes. Boots thunder past his head. Vietnamese voices shout orders. Lawrence lies there helpless, waiting for a North Vietnamese soldier to find him and put a bullet in his brain. This is the reality of LZ Albany. This is what happens when 1,100 disciplined soldiers ambush 375 exhausted men who have no security and whose leaders are all concentrated in one spot. Some American units manage to establish small defensive perimeters. Sergeants take command when lieutenants are killed. Soldiers rally around anyone who shows leadership. They form circles in the elephant grass, everyone facing out, firing at anything that moves, holding small pieces of ground by sheer determination. But these perimeters are scattered across the battlefield, isolated, unable to support each other, unable to coordinate. Each pocket of resistance fights its own private battle against overwhelming numbers. The North Vietnamese press their advantage. They know they have the Americans at their mercy. They attack repeatedly, trying to overrun the defensive positions. Americans run out of ammunition. Medics run out of supplies. Wounded men perform battlefield surgery on each other with no training and no equipment, just desperately trying to stop bleeding, to keep friends alive. The horror is beyond description. One of the most heartbreaking elements of this battle is how close the men are to each other, yet completely unable to help. Lawrence lies paralyzed 100 yards from where his best friend Cornette fights with Charlie Company. 100 yards, in different circumstances a 30-second sprint. But in this hell of tall grass and North Vietnamese soldiers, it might as well be 100 miles. Lawrence does not know if Cornette is alive or dead. Cornette does not know Lawrence has been hit. Companies that are normally in visual contact are separated by impenetrable vegetation and enemy fire. Men hear their friends screaming for help and cannot reach them. This psychological torture compounds the physical. Survivors will carry guilt for decades. Why did I live when my friend died? Why couldn't I save him? Why couldn't I reach him? 2 p.m. The battle has been raging for 45 minutes. North Vietnamese attacks continue, but some are being repulsed. The Americans in the copse of trees have established a solid perimeter. They are killing any North Vietnamese who tries to assault their position. They're also sniping at enemy soldiers visible around the edges of the landing zone, but the rest of the battalion is scattered and shattered. Company C has been virtually annihilated. 93% casualties, almost the entire company killed or wounded. The survivors fight from behind piles of dead bodies, using their friends' corpses as cover. This is the grim arithmetic of combat. You survive however you can. Company D has heavy casualties. Company A is split with part in the defensive perimeter, and the rest scattered in the grass. Headquarters Company has taken casualties among the staff officers and radio operators. The attached unit from 1st Battalion 5th Cavalry is fighting desperately to survive. At approximately 2:30 p.m, reinforcements begin to arrive. Bravo Company from 2nd Battalion 5th Cavalry starts marching from LZ Columbus. They heard the firing. They know 2nd 7th is in trouble. They move toward the sound of guns, but they face the same terrain problems: dense vegetation, limited visibility. And as they approach the Albany area, they start taking fire from North Vietnamese positions. This is not going to be an easy rescue. The reinforcements have to fight their way in. Meanwhile, Major Frank Henry, the 2nd 7th executive officer who was not with the main column, coordinates artillery support and medical evacuation helicopters from a nearby fire base. He is frantically trying to get help to his men, but the fog of war is thick. Reports are confused. Radio communications are sporadic. No one has a clear picture of exactly where all the American units are or how bad the casualties are. The North Vietnamese continue attacking through the afternoon. They probe the American defensive positions looking for weak points. When they find isolated soldiers or small groups, they attack with overwhelming force. They are efficient, brutal, professional. This is not the Viet Cong. This is the regular North Vietnamese army. Trained soldiers who have marched hundreds of miles down the Ho Chi Minh Trail to kill Americans, and they are very good at it. The Americans fight with everything they have: rifle fire, grenades, bayonets, sheer stubbornness. Some positions hold against multiple assaults, others are overrun. The battle becomes a series of desperate stands scattered across 500 meters of jungle and elephant grass. There is no cohesive defense, no coordinated counterattack, just individual and small unit actions. Survival, killing the enemy before he kills you, holding ground measured in meters, refusing to break even when breaking seems like the only rational choice, As the afternoon wears into evening, the situation begins to stabilize slightly. Not improve, stabilize. The initial shock of the ambush is over. The Americans who survived the first minutes have found cover, formed perimeters, established fields of fire. The North Vietnamese attacks are being beaten back with heavy casualties on both sides. The reinforcements from 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry establish contact with Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry, at the rear of the original column. They create a corridor that allows some wounded to be evacuated. A landing zone is cleared, and medevac helicopters brave intense fire to land and pull out casualties. Pilots fly their Hueys into a firestorm to save lives. Door gunners rake the tree line with M60 machine guns while wounded are loaded. These aviators show incredible courage. Some helicopters are shot up badly but keep flying. The wounded are extracted to field hospitals where surgeons work frantically to save lives. But as evening falls, the nightmare is far from over. Darkness brings a whole new dimension of terror. In daylight you can at least see a few meters. In darkness, in triple canopy jungle, you cannot see your hand in front of your face. The only light comes from muzzle flashes and explosions. North Vietnamese soldiers continue to prowl through the battlefield. They search for wounded Americans. They execute anyone they find alive. The sounds in the darkness are horrifying. Screaming, gunfire! Vietnamese voices calling to each other. Wounded men moaning. Some American soldiers play dead all night, lying among corpses, hoping the North Vietnamese will not realize they are still alive. Others huddle in small groups, whispering to each other, trying to maintain some sense of sanity. The perimeter in the copse of trees holds, but they are surrounded. Anyone who tries to move risks being shot by friend or foe. So they wait. Through the longest night of their lives, they wait for dawn. Lieutenant Lawrence spends the night in the elephant grass, paralyzed and terrified. Someone did drag him to relative safety near the defensive perimeter, but he cannot move. He lies there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of men dying. He does not know if he will survive until morning. He does not know that his friend Cornette is already dead. Killed in the early minutes of the battle. Lawrence will learn this later, and it will haunt him for the rest of his life. Survivor's guilt. Why did Cornette die and Lawrence live? There is no answer, just the terrible randomness of combat. 2 bullets through Lawrence's helmet that missed his head by millimeters and left him paralyzed but alive. Cornette taking fire that killed him outright. Random, senseless. The way war always is when you strip away the grand strategy and look at individual lives. Through the night, North Vietnamese soldiers continue to hold most of the battlefield. They control the ground where the ambush occurred, where the bulk of the American casualties lie, dead and wounded mixed together in the elephant grass. The North Vietnamese search bodies take weapons and equipment, execute wounded. This is not a war crime in their view. This is war. The Americans invaded their country, killed their people, bombed their cities. The North Vietnamese soldiers have no mercy for American wounded. This is total war. And in total war, the rules that civilized nations claim to follow often disappear in the reality of combat. The Americans who survive the night do so through a combination of luck, courage, and the confusion that saves some while killing others. November 18th. Dawn. The North Vietnamese withdraw. They pull back toward the Chupong Massif and the Cambodian border. They have achieved their objective. They ambushed an American battalion, inflicted massive casualties, disrupted American operations, and they did it with relatively light losses compared to the Americans, estimated 400 North Vietnamese killed in the battle. But the Americans lost 155 killed, 124 wounded. Out of 375 men, that is a 70% casualty rate. Catastrophic. The worst single-day battalion casualties of the entire Vietnam War. Charlie Company suffered 93% casualties, almost completely wiped out. The 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry as a combat-effective unit ceased to exist on November 17th. Morning light reveals the full horror. Bodies everywhere. American and North Vietnamese mixed together. The elephant grass is trampled and blood-soaked. Equipment is scattered across the battlefield. Helmets, weapons, radios, medical supplies, personal effects. The smell of death hangs heavy. Smoke from fires still burning, cordite, blood, fuel. The survivors emerge from their defensive positions and begin the grim task of recovering the dead and wounded. Medics move among the casualties. Some wounded have been lying in the grass all night. dehydrated, in shock, bleeding. The medics do what they can, but many wounds are beyond field treatment. Helicopters land and evacuate the worst casualties first, trip after trip, loading the wounded, flying them to hospitals, then returning for more. The American bodies are collected, 155 dead, each one someone's son, someone's husband, someone's brother. First Lieutenant Don Cornette, dead less than 100 yards from where his best friend James Lawrence lay paralysed. Cornette's body is found and identified. He will go home to his family. Lawrence will survive. His spine was not severed, just severely bruised. He will recover after physical therapy. He will return to duty in 1966 and finish his tour. But he will never forget Albany. He will spend the rest of his life telling the story, speaking to schools, veterans groups, military audiences, sharing the lessons learned, making sure that Cornette and the others are not forgotten, making sure their sacrifice means something. The investigation into what went wrong begins immediately. How did an American battalion walk into an ambush and suffer 70% casualties? Military analysts will study this battle for decades, and they will identify clear violations of basic infantry doctrine. Lieutenant Colonel McDade failed to conduct adequate reconnaissance. He did not maintain proper control of his dispersed companies. He called all company commanders forward, concentrating leadership at one point, leaving units leaderless. He did not establish proper security during movement or when the column halted. The men were exhausted and let their guard down. These are exactly the kinds of mistakes that infantry officers are trained never to make. But they happened, and 155 men died because of them. Some will defend McDade. He received poor intelligence. His orders were vague. He was operating in extremely difficult terrain with an exhausted battalion. The enemy executed a nearly perfect ambush. All of this is true, but it is also true that better tactical decisions could have prevented or mitigated the disaster. Flank security would have detected the North Vietnamese positions. Proper dispersion would have prevented all company commanders from being in one location. Aggressive reconnaissance would have identified the threat before the main body walked into it. These are fundamentals, and they were not followed. The price was paid in blood. The media coverage of LZ Albany is minimal compared to LZ X-Ray. The battle at X-Ray was a clear American victory. 300 Americans inflicted massive casualties on the North Vietnamese and held their ground. That is a story that fits the narrative. American firepower and courage defeating communist aggression. Albany does not fit that narrative. Albany is an American battalion getting ambushed and shattered. That story does not help morale back home, so X-Ray becomes famous and Albany is quietly downplayed. The book We Were Soldiers, Once and Young, focuses on X-Ray. The movie We Were Soldiers focuses on X-Ray. Albany gets a mention but not the detailed treatment. This is understandable from a storytelling perspective, but it is tragic from a historical one. Because Albany teaches lessons that are just as important as X-Ray, maybe more important. The survivors of 2nd Battalion 7th Cavalry are flown back to Pleiku, then trucked back to An Khe Base Camp. When they left for the Ia Drang operation, they were 375 men. They return in 4 trucks. 4. The division band plays Gary Owen as they pull into base camp. The traditional cavalry song. The men sit in the trucks exhausted, traumatized, staring at nothing. Some cry. Most are just numb. They have seen things no human should see, done things no human should have to do, lost friends, killed enemies, survived by sheer luck when others died. They will carry Albany with them forever. Nightmares, flashbacks, survivor guilt. Many will struggle with post-traumatic stress for the rest of their lives. Some will cope better than others. All will be changed. The North Vietnamese also learn lessons from Albany. They realize that close-quarters ambushes negate American advantages in firepower and air support. When North Vietnamese soldiers are mixed in among American units, the Americans cannot call artillery or airstrikes without killing their own men. This tactic will be used throughout the rest of the war, hugging the Americans, getting in close, negating their technological superiority. It becomes a cornerstone of North Vietnamese tactics. They also learn that American units operating on the ground away from bases are vulnerable if proper security is not maintained. The combination of terrain, fatigue, and complacency creates opportunities for devastating attacks. The North Vietnamese will exploit these opportunities repeatedly. For the 1st Cavalry Division, Albany is a wake-up call. The division had just validated its airmobile concept at X-Ray. Helicopters moving troops rapidly, inserting into landing zones, using firepower to destroy enemy formations. It worked. But Albany shows the limitations. When the enemy controls the ground and springs an ambush, even the best equipped, most mobile division can be shattered. The 1st Cav will adjust its tactics, more aggressive reconnaissance, better security procedures, never letting units operate in column formation without flank security. These changes come too late for the men who died at Albany, but they save lives later. The families back in the United States receive telegrams. Western Union. We regret to inform you, your son, your husband, your brother, killed in action. November 17th, Vietnam. 155 telegrams, 155 families shattered, Gold Star mothers, widows, orphaned children, communities mourning their local boys who went to war and did not come home. The funerals happen in small towns across America. Flag-draped coffins, honor guards, taps playing, folded flags presented to grieving mothers, and the question that has no answer: why? What did he die for? What was accomplished? At X-Ray you can say we stopped a North Vietnamese offensive, we inflicted massive casualties, we won the battle. At Albany, what can you say? We walked into an ambush, we suffered catastrophic casualties, we lost the battle. Both statements are true, and both are unsatisfying to families who just want their sons back. The military awards process begins. Medals are recommended. Silver stars for extraordinary heroism, bronze stars for valor, purple hearts for wounds. The men who held the defensive perimeter in the copse of trees against repeated assaults are recognized. The medics who worked under fire treating wounded are decorated. The helicopter pilots who flew into the kill zone to evacuate casualties receive awards. The sergeants who rallied men and led small unit actions are honored. These awards are deserved. Genuine heroism happened at Albany. Men did extraordinary things under unimaginable circumstances, but medals cannot bring back the dead, cannot erase the trauma, cannot make sense of the senseless. They are symbols, recognition, a nation trying to honor sacrifice even when that sacrifice accomplished little. The historical debate about LZ Albany continues to this day. Military historians argue about what went wrong and who was responsible. Some blame McDade for tactical failures. Others blame Brigade Commander Brown for inadequate planning and intelligence. Some fault division leadership for the decision to march battalions overland through dangerous terrain instead of extracting by helicopter from X-ray. There is blame enough to go around. The reality is that war is chaotic. Commanders make decisions with incomplete information under enormous pressure. Sometimes those decisions work out, sometimes they do not. At Albany, everything went wrong at once. Poor intelligence, inadequate security, bad luck, enemy skill. The result was disaster. Learning from that disaster is important. Assigning blame is less so. What we should remember about LZ Albany is the men who fought there, the soldiers who found themselves in hell and refused to break. Lieutenant Lawrence lying paralysed in the grass. Lieutenant Cornett dying in the first minutes. The sergeants who took command when officers fell. The medics who treated wounds knowing they were next targets. The soldiers who fought all afternoon and all night surrounded and outnumbered. The helicopter crews who came in under fire. The reinforcements who fought their way through to help. These men deserve to be remembered not as statistics or tactical lessons, but as human beings who did their duty under the worst possible circumstances. They were sons and brothers and husbands and friends. They went to war because their country asked them to, and 155 of them never came home. The legacy of LZ Albany extends beyond the specific tactical lessons. It represents something larger about the Vietnam War. The war was full of battles like this. Firefights in the jungle, ambushes on patrol, small unit actions where Americans died far from home for objectives that were unclear. X-Ray was the exception. A clear, large-scale battle with identifiable results. Albany was the norm. Confusion, chaos, heavy casualties, uncertain outcomes. And that is part of why Vietnam was such a difficult war for Americans to understand. There was no front line advancing toward Berlin, no island hopping campaign toward Tokyo, just battles and ambushes and patrols and casualties in a war that seemed to have no end and no clear purpose. LZ Albany epitomizes that reality. For James Lawrence, the survivor guilt never fully goes away. He will speak to audiences about Albany more than 20 times over the decades. He will write a book. He will join panels of Ia Drang survivors at military conferences. He will tell Don Cornett's story. He will explain what happened. he will share the lessons, and he will always ask himself the same question: why did I live when Don died? There is no answer, just the randomness of combat. 2 bullets through a helmet that missed the head, paralysis instead of death, survival instead of a name on the Vietnam Memorial Wall. Lawrence will say that he believes he survived so he could share their story, so the men who died at Albany would not be forgotten, so their sacrifice would teach something to future generations. Whether that is true or not, it is the meaning Lawrence has found. And perhaps that is all any of us can do with trauma. Find meaning where we can. Honour the dead by remembering them. Learn from tragedy so it is not repeated. The Battle of LZ Albany happened 59 years ago as of this recording. The survivors are old men now if they are still alive. Many have passed, but their story remains, preserved in after-action reports, in oral histories, in books and articles, in the memories of those who were there. 155 Americans killed in 2 hours, the worst single battalion day in Vietnam, a battle that should be as famous as X-Ray but has been largely forgotten. That needs to change. We need to remember Albany. We need to study it, learn from it, honour the men who fought there, because if we forget battles like Albany, we risk repeating the mistakes. We dishonour the sacrifice. We lose the lessons purchased with blood. So remember November 17th, 1965. Remember 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry. Remember the elephant grass and the ambush and the horror. Remember Lieutenant Don Cornett, who died. Remember Lieutenant James Lawrence, who lived but carries the scars. Remember the sergeants and privates and medics and helicopter pilots. Remember that war is not glory and honour. War is young men dying in terror and confusion for objectives they barely understand. War is mistakes and chaos and random death. And sometimes war is necessary despite all that horror. But we owe it to those who fight to at least remember them accurately. Not as heroes in a movie, but as human beings who faced the worst and did their best. That is the legacy of LZ Albany. That is what we must never forget.